This is Chris Albert, and I'm here to remind you of one thing. Someday, you're going to die. Now, that's not some morbid statement or scary idea. It's a solid fact. Your time here on this earth is limited. And we need to be reminded of this as much as possible for one simple reason. To live your best life while you can. This is the Warrior Soul Podcast.
You know, if you live long enough, you're probably going to get this piece of advice at some point in your life, and that is to face your demons. And while it's good advice, it's not always easy to implement. That's because most of us don't really know how to find our demons in the first place. We keep them locked away somewhere. They're deep inside, clawing away, ripping out our insides. But we can't access them to fight them. The only time they really come out is when we're at our most vulnerable, when we're trying to do something big to change our lives, or when we're alone and when we feel helpless. Our guest today, Mike Ergo, is a United States Marine Corps combat veteran. He's somebody who's faced a lot of demons, and his demons drove him toward drugs and alcohol after his service. They nearly ripped his life apart. But one thing you'll learn from this story is that if you're going to face your demons, you have to actively go out on a quest to find them. And that quest is going to be a bit uncomfortable. It's going to involve a little bit of self-imposed pain. Not pain in the cutting yourself sense or anything like that, but I'm talking about putting yourself up to a challenge, something that you have to overcome. And when you do it that way, you can make those demons come out. Mike is an Ironman Triathlete. He's competed at Kona. And the first time he competed at Kona, he wasn't even really ready for it. And if you're familiar with what an Ironman triathlon is, it's a 2-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and that's followed up by a full marathon. And if you're out there by yourself long enough, plodding away, experiencing the pain, at some point, those demons in the back of your mind, they're going to come out and they're going to be front and center. There's a lot more to Mike's story than this, and you'll hear it in the interview. But, I really enjoyed talking to him. And the reason why I really enjoyed talking to him was because he's somebody who's been able to actualize himself through his pain, through his trauma. And he's turned that trauma into a strength. And he's turned that quest into something that could help others. He's working with Gold Star families, and he's trying to connect with them and reconnect the veteran community to those families who've lost a warrior that they loved and who are experiencing pain and demons probably beyond that which a lot of us listening to this podcast could comprehend. So before we get into this conversation with Mike, I just have a few different announcements. Number one, you're listening to the Warrior Soul Podcast, and my name is Chris Albert. I started this podcast because over the past decade and a half of war, the U.S. military veteran community has faced things like suicide, increased rates of homelessness, and massive amounts of depression and chronic disease. And while a lot of people are trying to raise awareness about these issues, talking about them, what we're trying to do here is deliver real solutions. Because in my opinion, if you're talking about something without delivering actual solutions that could help people, what you're doing is complaining, and that solves nothing. If you're not a veteran, you can still get a lot out of these episodes. They're filled with advice and tactics to help you to live a better life. And all we ask in return is that you spread the word, that you share these episodes out with others who could be helped by them, and that you spread the word by writing us a review on iTunes, a written review on iTunes. It helps so much to spread the word about the show, and it lets people know what we're about. The other announcement I have is that this podcast is brought to you by F-Bomb Nutrition. They're an awesome company that's done so much to help us and the U.S. military community. They're sending packages of their product out overseas to troops on the front line who need supplements for the nutrition they get in their MREs. And their product is good, healthy fats in an awesome portable packet. They make amazing macadamia nut butters. They mix them up with chocolate, with sea salt, with coconut butter, and with pecan butter. And if you want to get yours, they're giving 20% off to our listeners. Use the code WarriorSoul at checkout at www.dropinfbomb.com. You'll get 20% off of your first order. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and we'll get into this conversation with Mike Ergo from the Transitions from War podcast and Ironman Triathlete. Mike, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good. Thank you, man. I had a nice stationary bike for about an hour and 15 today. So kind of feeling more awake than usual. Feeling good.
Nice. Is that like a morning ritual for you? Are you on the stationary bike or do you do other types of exercises in the morning?
It depends. If I have nothing planned, like I'm in my off season now, but if I have training schedule, that's pretty by the book, run, bike or swim or a little lifting. But these days it's, pull-ups, kettlebell, meditation first, and then jumping into some kind of exercise, get my body moving. Sometimes it's just been a walk, around the neighborhood when it's dark out. I get up usually around 5.
Nice. And I want to get into all of that, all of your morning ritual, but for the good of our audience, let's talk about you for a second. Mike, you served in the United States Marine Corps and you started a podcast called Transitions from War. You're an endurance competitor. Can you kind of take us back to where it all began?
Sure. I mean, in terms of like after I got out, or like
let's go all the way back. Let's go back
to
your birth as a young Green Marine.
Yeah, stepped on the yellow footprints in San Diego in October of 2001. And the thing was, in the spring, my senior year of high school, I auditioned to be in the band, and I said, "All right, this is going to be cool. I'm going to play my saxophone in service of our country." And then 9/11 happened, and obviously shit got very real. And I eventually ended up switching out of the band. I failed myself out, and my request to go to the infantry was granted. And so I'm one of the few Marines, I think, who's done MCT, the Pope version of combat training, and then full on SOI.
So that's great, because the Marine Corps band, that's no joke, right? To get in there, you gotta have certain qualifications to start, and then I can't imagine that it's easy to go through that training as a musician, right?
Well, I think the weirdest thing was this. So you go through boot camp, you a fully life-changing experience. You get indoctrinated and enculturated. You learn how to be a Marine, and then you go through Marine combat training. It's like a 2-week, 3-week journey out into the field and learn that part of it. And then right from there, go to the Armed Forces School of Music. It's such a weird transition to go from like full on like, running, filling sandbags, shooting 203s. And then all of a sudden you're playing an instrument in a room for a while. So it was a weird switch. I loved playing music growing up, and I played piano, saxophone, percussion instruments, did all the bands, jazz band, marching band, and that. But for that time in my life, my heart just wasn't in it. And so, yeah, it was spending five hours a day, practicing in the classroom, and afterwards playing my saxophone. It was weird because it's something that I love to do, but it's just like, for whatever reason, I didn't know, just my heart just wasn't in it. And, I asked, hey, I failed one of my auditions early on. And then I took a really passive way, I kind of pussed out. If I really been able to speak and say what I needed to say, I would have said, hey, I would like to be I'd like to go to the infantry instead. Can we make this happen? And instead, I just let myself fail the auditions. And then finally, I had to go on a review board. Like all the schools, like the branches commanders are right there. And it's where most people kind of beg to stay in the school. And I said, actually, I'd rather go to the grunts. And they said, no problem. And so a few weeks later, I got a Greyhound bus ticket down to Camp Lejeune and started learning how to be an 0311 rifleman. And then I was eventually,
So you went through boot camp in San Diego, or did you go through in Paris Island?
San Diego, yeah. I'm from California.
You went to Camp Geiger for infantry training.
Yeah,
that is a rarity in and of itself, man. So I got a bunch of questions to ask you now, man. So number one, did anybody give you any shit in boot camp or after you got out of the band in ITB for having been in the band?
Oh yeah, like heaps. Like large mounds of just shit. And so, I mean, things were against me from day one in boot camp, first of all, because I showed up and even though they shaved my head, they could still see I was chubby. I was like 30 pounds overweight. Maybe I was just almost fat enough not to show up. I got really fat over the summer. So I was chubby, pale, and I had red hair. So it's like strike three. And then when I showed up to my grunt unit, they're like, okay, so we had this guy. It wasn't a normal boot drop where you have about like 30, 40 guys, classing up and showing up to a new unit. It was like me and a few other people. So my platoon got me, the redheaded kid from band, and this guy who seemed ancient at the time. He was 29. That's a Filipino American guy who I remember him.
That's a senior citizen in the Marine Corps. That's an old man.
AARP and everything, man. And he was like, he already had like a hurt leg. And so, he was like, it was me and like the broke dick. And so they're like, I fucking hate this guy. So they affectionately, they asked me all these questions like, so, how was Marine Corps band camp? And, just every single joke you can imagine. But, so I had to definitely earn my place there, because even the boots, the young Marines, they're like, oh, finally someone we can shit on and someone who's lower than us. And so I got it from like, it just rolled downhill all the way.
And but deep inside, were you a little bit happy that was going on? Was it like, I always, I kind of miss getting screwed around with sometimes, you know what I mean? Like I don't have anybody friggin', shitting on me. And sometimes I'm like, damn, I need somebody to shit on me. I guess that's why I have a girlfriend, but.
Well, it's great because left to my own devices, like there'll be things I'll hide from myself. There'll be things that I could be doing better that you have to be really intentional to call yourself out on your shortcomings and your weaknesses. And, having that, I love that. And I think overall, the reason I joined the Marine Corps, like I was all set up to go to college in Germany. I got a scholarship there, and like my parents are proud, like, wow, he's going to be this international kid. But then in my heart, it just didn't feel right. And like, I wanted to be able to earn something that only I could earn. And I knew I could go through life being kind of mediocre and never really testing myself. And so in that same way, like when I showed up my unit, I was like, I have to earn like every ounce of like, respect or privileges that I'm getting here. So I like that deep down.
So you mentioned you were chubby, and did that last throughout your time in the Marine Corps, or at what point did you fix that?
It went up and down. I was just, I think, a strong believer in, work out a lot, thrash myself, and then just like treat my body like shit by like just drinking lots of beer and eating like pizza all the time. Mm-hmm. And so like, it was funny. I was looking back at pictures, even my second deployment, like I think I mean, we'll get into all this, but like I would stress eat, you know, like I do some emotional eating. So before my second deployment too, like my wife and I were looking at pictures of when I got in Iraq the second time, and she's like, "Wow, you're fat there." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." I like I'm in better shape now than I was. I'd say then. I mean, I was probably stronger then because I spent time at the gym, but like overall fitness wise, way better shape now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I think I went up and down. Like I can't tell you exactly when and where, but it wasn't like I was the picture perfect, Marine with washboard abs.
It's funny how that works because, everybody on the outside thinks like, oh, you're going into the Marine Corps, you got to be in the best shape of your life, all this stuff. But like, I mean, honestly, like I think I came out of boot camp in worse shape than when I went in because the runs were a lot slower than what I was doing and everything like that. And you don't get the opportunity to PT whenever you want to. And so, and then the way most Marines eat, like, I mean, you beer, pizza, chow hall food, MREs, that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure your digestive system, my digestive system while I was in was probably completely screwed. Yeah, it's an interesting situation, for most people on the outside looking in versus what the actual reality is.
Yeah. And I mean, just all the empty calories from just all kinds of beer too, it wasn't helping anything, like I came out of boot camp though. For me, it was great. Like it was great the way I came out because I think, God, I lost 29 pounds like in boot camp. A lot of that, water weight at first. But like I slimmed down and I'm probably the slimmest I've been up until maybe a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that part of it worked, but it wasn't a sustainable model, for anyone to keep up with. But yeah, you're right. Like I had no knowledge of nutrition, like what I should be eating or like how to recover from workouts. So it was just like, do this every day until your body physically can't do it. And then do that again tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a major weakness, I think. And we can get into that and we can talk a little bit about, I have my own opinions on how this is affecting veterans post-service, and I think you do too. So you get out, you're in the fleet, you go on multiple deployments, and kind of take us through that.
Yeah, my first deployment was in spring of 2003. So we did invasion of Iraq, and we didn't do too much for the invasion. And I was on a MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, and so we were on ships in the Mediterranean Sea. And originally we were supposed to go through Turkey from the north with some army units from Germany. That plan got canceled because Turkey, decided we don't want people come through our country. And so we just kind of like watched the invasion on the Chow Hall TV on our ship, felt like losers. And then we went in for a few weeks into Mosul and basically just guarded an airport that Green Berets and SOCOM guys had already taken over. And then we just waited until 100 showed up and we flew back onto our ship. And so that deployment was kind of weird. We felt like, one, we had missed Afghanistan. Like, this is summer of 2003, right? Okay, Afghanistan's been over for a year. That war's done. And then we missed the Iraq war because they already, got to Baghdad and everything's fine. So like we missed like two big wars of our generation and like they're over now. Just thinking back to like Desert Storm when that, it was 100 hours of combat.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, I guess we'll have to tell lies about war stories or like find something cool to do, And so nothing too great to report on that one. And the second one, we knew we were going back and it was supposed to be just stability and support operations. And this is spring of 2004. And we said, okay, we're just basically going to be guarding, like the reconstruction efforts and like going, shaking hands and talking to people and saying, hello, like you'll get to vote for people and have democracy. Aren't you happy? And that changed when the guys from Blackwater were killed and, hung from the bridges in Fallujah and burned. And we knew, maybe things won't be going according to plan there. So we kind of got geared up for something major. We went back to Iraq in the Al Anbar province. and started out in Al Assad Air Base, just basically this big Iraqi air base in the middle of nowhere. And pretty soon into it, we started experiencing the just little hit and run, attacks from, the insurgency, and a lot of IEDs. They had come into fashion by then, and they were getting pretty good at them. So less than a month into it, my best friend, another redhead guy, kid I was really just my best friend, really good friends with. This is actually, you talk about the time, like I was in the most shape, is probably on this first deployment. We had so much time on ship that this guy, like, we'd go down and he taught me how to work out properly. He taught me how to recover, some basics of nutrition. And so my buddy Todd Godwin, he was just the perfect mentor for that time in my life. But he was killed by an IED, and then it's like, okay, this is real. And so I just, like, within a few hours of that, I was like, all right, well, we got to go back on, mission. And so I got to shelve all those feelings. And I said, well, we'll deal with that later at some point. And so that the summer can kind of continue like that. We'd lose a few people from IEDs between, like, in the summer. This is all around the city of Fallujah. And then in November 2004, then that's when things got real. There was Operation Phantom Fury, where we went into, the belly of the beast there, and essentially cleared, I believe it's a city of 250,000 people or so. Most civilians were evacuated. Some chose to stay. But we kicked open doors basically from the north to the south, and then kind of like did sector clearing to find the remaining pockets of the insurgency. And that for us lasted about a month, and that we took some pretty heavy losses there. And so that was like the big, that was urban combat, at its highest level. So it was everything I imagined, war would be like, and then a lot more too.
Yeah.
In terms of, no, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It just going through the escalation, and I think for a lot of people out there who might have come in afterwards, that should be a really interesting concept, because you came in at an interesting time, right? With 9/11 happening, meaning you were in the Marine Corps when 9/11 happened, like I was, and I think a lot of people forget at the time when we first went into Iraq, we thought that was the war. You know what I mean? We thought that was the war, and that
right.
We thought a lot of times, you watch Saddam's statue falling, and you're like, oh my God, I missed it. All these things. And I told you when I was on your show, I got back from a deployment the day that Saddam Hussein was captured, and it was like, oh, war's over. I'm going to go do something else now. But little did we know. You know what I mean? A couple of years later, you'd still be there. And then years after that, you'd still be there, and it would escalate, and the enemy would get smarter, and they would become better fighters, and they become more elusive, and they would use different techniques and all these different things. And it's just really interesting to hear it from that point of view, because a lot of times I think people miss out on that, and it's hard to look back with hindsight or without the hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because we have the advantage of perspective now of like, oh, these are these two wars that have gone, well, off and on, and mostly on, since either 2001 or 2003. And then, but back then, yeah, you look at it, you're like, okay, the last time we were in Iraq, it didn't last that long, big buildup. And so we're like, it must not last that long. There's no way it could. And so, yeah, the mentality going into it, they're like, oh, well, this is probably the end. Yeah, we really thought that after Fallujah that would be, I mean, it was expected to be like, okay, this is supposed to break the back of the insurgency. And, obviously that didn't happen. Most of them moved off to the ones that stayed, and fought and died. The others who weren't captured or killed moved on to Ramadi, and then they just kind of like shifted the playing field over there. And, Marines and the Army had to deal with that, 2005, 2006.
Yeah. So you go through those deployments, and then you mentioned you lost a friend, you lost some people. after that deployment, what happened? Did you decide to get out of the Marine Corps? Did you decide to stay in? What was going on there?
Well, let's see. When I got back, there's this, for a lot of us, myself included, this like big elation of like, oh, we're back. Like, holy shit, we made it back. Like, I did not expect to come home alive at all. And so first part is that the honeymoon, seeing my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and seeing my parents and being back with my friends, feeling like, yeah, we did this. We got back alive. We survived this. And then that wore off eventually. And then like kind of with the idle time of just cleaning weapons and sitting around, all these things that we put off feeling and thinking about during the deployment because we were so, focused on the mission started to show up like, oh, this guy died. You'll never see him again. And just for me, just all kinds of survivor guilt. And for me, that's when I started noticing little blips of PTSD, like I had this feeling like something bad was about to happen, but it didn't make sense in my mind, but my body was feeling it. So it was just really confusing, between that and a lot of alcohol use was just, that's what my life revolved around, trying to like do anything not to feel or think about those things. And then, let's see. So I got out the summer of 2005. And I remember I was like pretty close to being deployed, just sent as an individual replacement for another unit. But I guess I didn't have enough time, and they didn't, stop loss me or extend me. So I ended up getting out that summer, coming back home. And I thought, like I wanted, like at that point I was done. At that point I was like, I love the Marine Corps, but like what's left to do? I did everything, I thought about, I wanted to do in a war, that second deployment. And I was like, where do you go from here? So I was like, I was done. I was not in a good place mentally. I was like, I need to do something else. So a little burnt out and, went to school and tried to find my way there. And it was basically a very wobbly path I was walking on. Like I wanted to find the next step, but I was so stuck in like, survivor guilt, anxiety, PTSD, self-pity came into it. And then alcoholism just like bloomed. I tried to bring that barracks lifestyle home. And I was like, what do you mean you guys don't get blacked out on a Tuesday? Like.
Yeah, I've definitely been blacked out on many Tuesdays and
yeah, exactly.
Thursdays. So you mentioned you went to school. Where'd you go to school?
I started at a community college and Diablo Valley College in Northern California. And then eventually I transferred to UC Berkeley. So I went, I was trying to find my way, I'm gifted in languages. So I was like, okay, I'm going to study Arabic and then work for the State Department or something. And then I realized, maybe like the fact that I smoke weed all the time probably won't go over well with there's no way I'm getting into that. And then, I just like it. So I started studying Mandarin and I was studying Japanese. And I was like, but there was I had these goals, but I didn't have any values connected to them. No, like the purpose. And I said, that'll be neat. I'm good at that. That makes sense up here, but not in my heart. And then eventually working with a counselor at a vet center as part of the VA, I started actually to get a little hope and feel better. And it was a weird road. Like I jump into therapy and jump out. The only reason I ended up trying to get help at first was because I had a neighbor who's a Vietnam vet. He's like, hey man, you look like I did when I came back from Nam. So why don't you go to this place and talk to these people? I do this. And I was like, okay, well, he's a Vietnam vet. They fought it like a crazy war. So I had a lot of respect for him and what he'd gone through. And so I was like, all right, I'll try it out just so he won't like hassle me about it. So then, I'm making a little improvements, kind of like gaining some insight, realizing that my life some way is untenable, but I was still trying to say, okay, hopefully I can still binge drink all the time and continue my like educational path. And like, it was working just barely. I was barely getting by, but I was getting decent grades. But like, I'd miss days at work. Like I'd lie to my girlfriend. It was just like, I could see my values just like, tanking. Mm-hmm. So, but I knew I wanted to be able to help other vets. That was a big thing, that continued service. And so my original counselor, she's like, well, have you ever thought about being a social worker? And I was like, well, doesn't that just mean like you go and take people's kids away? She's like, no, you can, that's part of it, but it's also like therapy, or just helping people like figure out what's going on with them so they can make changes in their own life. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. So that's when I went to Berkeley, did my undergrad there, and then my master's in social work there. But by that point, like I was deep in enough that like learning about trauma work, and I did an internship at the VA hospital in Livermore, California. And there was this moment where like I was witnessing, kind of shadowing a therapist who was doing a technique called prolonged exposure, where somebody just talks over a traumatic incident over and over again. And I was like, no, I got this. I've moved past it. I've done these therapies. I'm good. But something this guy was saying, it just hit me. And like, I started to feel it myself, like my heart racing and all these like physiological reactions in my body. I was like, oh my God, like this is embarrassing, but I can't control this. And like, I was crying, I was just like, whatever, I don't know what's happening right now, but I knew I was just overwhelmed. And so then I had to, figure out that I had to do some major work on myself, which included, confronting some things about myself that weren't what I was purporting, to the world. That, I was cheating on my wife. I was binge drinking and lying. I wasn't, I was, smoking weed, just using some coke, taking some pills. And it was just like, shit, trains was off the track. It wasn't working. So I came to this point where I was like, I got to stop. And I told my wife, I was like, look, this is what's going on. I just laid it all there. I'm tired. Like the weight of all like the lies and secret life I was living was just crushing me. I was like, I know if I continue this way, I'll probably end up like killing myself. I'll probably just shoot myself in the head, because I don't want to feel these big contradictions of my life that I'm living. And I need a way out of this. And so, I said, look, this is what's going on. I do love you. I do care about you, but I don't blame you if you want to leave. And she said, look, she left, moved back in with her parents, and said, here's the deal. Like, you go get help for your drinking. And if you touch one more drop of alcohol or use one more drug, then it is over. And so I had that choice to make. And I was like, holy shit, I can't imagine living life without these chemicals, because that was the only time I felt good. I mean, like growing up, like I always dealt with depression. I realize that now, and being anxious about, having to please people. And so when I would drink or when I would smoke weed, it was like, oh, I just felt this intense relief. Like I could just like be okay. And so for me to like imagine, like, does that mean I'm just going to feel like shit all the time and be sober, was fucking terrifying. But I went, did some 12-step recovery groups for a little while, and I felt this full tsunami of feelings, including, guilt, issues of self-worth, fear, sadness, of this just really crippling self-pity, which is probably the worst. Like, I deserve to drink and be a piece of shit because this is what me war, Yeah. So
it's interesting to me because, you mentioned meditation is a big part of your morning ritual earlier in the podcast. And, one of the things I'm noticing here is like everything you're talking about with the use of drugs, with the cheating, with the drinking, all of that stuff, that wasn't you, but that was fear, right? That was fear.
Completely.
That was into you. That was all these feelings. And how did you start to separate that out? Like saying, okay, wait a minute, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with drugs. I'm struggling with all these things. I don't see how I could get through my life without these things. How did you begin to separate out that idea that wasn't you? That was something else that invaded your mind.
It almost ironically or paradoxically, it was during the middle of some very deep like trips I was having on edibles. And like, you know, when you consume cannabis, I don't know if it's true. I just know that Joe Rogan says that it changes the chemical compound and it becomes more hallucinogenic. That's been my experience. And so I'd eat too much of an edible, or probably just enough to where it wasn't fun, where all of a sudden all the things in my unconscious mind came into view and I could see, oh, this is something that I'm doing. Like I couldn't hide from myself, basically. Like I could keep all those walls up, but in these deep trips, I was like, oh, this is kind of shitty thing. This is a real thing. You can't hide from this. And I'd contemplate my own death. I'd contemplate just like seeing through the veil of what I was doing versus what was on my heart, what was right. And, you know, seeing like who I used to be as a kid, you know, like the things I used to love to do, you know, playing music, just being kind to people, you know, really, really being in touch with animals, like being outside, working out, like all these parts of my life that I just like blocked out. I was like, that's not good enough. Like I can't be that person. So, and then also, you know, hiding from, you know, some sexual trauma that happened early on in my life. Like I didn't want to deal with that shit. I was like, fucking bury that forever. So that came out, and, you know, little by little, I just realized, like, and this is like 2012 when I stopped using any kind of drugs or alcohol besides coffee. But I would get in these states, you know, just enough throughout these last few months of like wreckage and debauchery that I was like, okay, I have a choice to make. It's either this until I die, or I just like jump out and fucking, you know, embrace whatever's going to come. I'm trusting that, like, you know, at least I can be honest and not hide from myself anymore. So cannabis got me to the point, like, I'm always grateful for it. It got me to the point where I didn't need it anymore. It like, it even though I wasn't trying to use it like that, that's how it worked for me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the same exact experience with edibles and with cannabis. I mean, I have ulcerative colitis, so I'll use therapeutic cannabis in small doses, with like through a vaporizer. But anytime I've ever done an edible, I mean, and it's hard to explain this, but they're not fun. It's not a party drug. It's something that it will take that fear, that thing that's in back of your mind, and it will bring it right in front of your face, and it's going to hold it there and press it into your forehead.
Yeah,
and
it makes you look at it right there.
Yeah. It's like you got to deal with it right then and there. And that, you know, I tell people, if you're going to do it like that, make sure you're around people who can calm you down a little bit, because it will freak you out. You know, I've also had that experience, not exactly the same experience, but with psychedelics, with mushrooms and with DMT, and DMT was actually a highly ritualized use, and psilocybin mushrooms were more by accident, like the edibles were, but yeah, it's interesting how if you approach drugs from a certain perspective, they can actually keep you from using drugs, and they can actually bring that truth to the front of your mind.
Right. And there's this class I took at when I was at Berkeley, and it was drugs and the brain. And one of the big things I took away from it is that everything is a medicine and everything is a poison. It really depends on the dosage. And so once I learned that, I was like, okay, yeah, it's like, I'm not one of those sober people that says like, oh, alcohol is, you know, the bad, or cannabis is bad or anything like that. It's like, I just fucking sucked at using it, you know? Yeah.
Like, well, it's also the set and setting too. The set and setting, the whole lot, you know. If you're going to do an edible at like a death metal concert,
God, good luck.
Bad experience, you know.
Yeah, you're a Jedi warrior if you can do something like that, because unless you're just completely ignorant going into it.
Yeah, exactly. So at Berkeley, right, and a lot of people are probably hearing UC Berkeley, and they're like, oh my God, like, how did he get through that? Let alone the Marine Corps. You know, what was that experience like for you as a veteran, in being on a liberal California college campus?
I was pretty apprehensive going into it. But when I showed up, there was such a huge, like, veteran population there that like me, I hung out with Marines like everywhere there.
Really?
Yeah, it was really cool. And what I realized too was that there was a big distinction between, students and faculty at UC Berkeley and then the people who lived in the city of Berkeley. So whereas the people who lived in the city were definitely trended way more fringe left wing and anti-war, anti-military, the people at UC Berkeley were more inclined to be open and say, okay, well, tell me what you're about. Let's like in pursuit of knowledge, in pursuit of truth a little more. And these are generalizations, but one experience I had going, I think it was my first semester, was I took a class called War, Culture, and Society, and it was in the Peace and Conflict Studies department. And at one point, I told my professor, I said, here's some things you're talking about. Here's my perspective on them. Here's where I definitely, I definitely can back up what you're saying. Yes, this is happening. And here's where it differs based on my own experience. He's like, you want to give a lecture? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. So he gave me the floor for an entire lecture. And basically I got to just talk about my experience at, going to war, being a Marine, coming back, dealing with PTSD. And it surprised me because everybody listened. Some people were horrified, but some people, they listened. They genuinely listened. And then at the end, the entire class gave me a standing ovation. And so, yeah, so it was like the difference between, what our Vietnam vets faced coming back, where they just got shit on by everyone and blamed for the war, where people who were very against the Iraq war said, you know what, like, we're not going to pin this on you. And so we got to be see each other human to human, which is really nice. And that there were still, people there maybe outwardly who wouldn't say anything, but inwardly maybe were pretty judgmental. But that wasn't the majority of my experience, which really surprised me.
That's interesting because I guess the media perception of everything goes both ways. Like you think UC Berkeley and you think, oh my God, it's you can't have a free thought up there or anything like that.
Well, that culture was still kind of there. I mean, it got weird because I had these interactions, and this was before the big protest of right-wing speakers coming to Berkeley. But I remember being there, and I was in one of the smaller sections that the graduate student was leading, and I was like, "Oh, we were taking notes on something." I was like, "You want me to write that up on the blackboard?" They're like, "It's a chalkboard." I was like, "The blackboard? It's a chalkboard." And I didn't know what was going on. I was like, "What's happening here?" And then I said, and then I think it was the same class. I think it was the same day, but I was like, "Okay, let's you want someone to write this up on the whiteboard?" They're like, "It's a dry erase board." And then I was like, what the hell is going on here? Did I do something to piss them off? And then afterwards I realized, I was like, is this a racial thing? And so that was really weird because I'd ask people, I'd ask my black friends, I was like, is that a thing? They're like, I've never heard of that, So it became this, there was very selective, language you had to use at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's unique there, but there's also really selective, people would preface, a question. Oh my, you probably saw this when you were in school, where someone would, before they asked a question, would have this fucking 10-minute preface about how they were the least racist, most tolerant, most enlightened person ever. And then their question was dog shit. And you're like, I fucking wasted 10 minutes of a lecture. Listen to this.
Yeah. I grew up in so-and-so and I was this and I protested for this and blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to ask you blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I used to teach at UC Santa Barbara, and it was an interesting situation. I think it's probably far more worse now than it was.
Yeah.
So you're a triathlete and you were doing endurance, and how did that come about?
I think so. I bridged the gap of all my addictions, and coming into sobriety. CrossFit was the thing I was doing that I continue to do because I work out, and it was something my wife and I were doing together. It was like one of the few things we could do together at that time when I was rebuilding trust with her. And is one of the few healthy activities I had. So I was like, let's keep this going. And then I got into running again because I had a friend from my 30th, I think it was my 30th birthday. He gave me a registration to a half marathon. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I just looked at him. I was like, this is a shitty present. Like what is this?
You want me to run 12 miles? What?
This is not a present. Yeah, this is not a present. This is in December. It's gonna be cold. But I started, training up for it, maybe like 2 months before the race, just couldn't start running. And beyond like the first 2 weeks where I just felt like shit because my body was like flushing out a bunch of, stagnant bullshit that was in it. I just remember having this run. And I remember where I was running in the neighborhood, and I just like had this like feeling. It wasn't a thought, a feeling of like, oh, this feels good. And I felt good. And I realized that I can feel good. Like the feeling I was after with drugs and alcohol, I could have that in a better way, exercise. And I can have that. And I was like, it was like familiar feeling. I was like, I remember how good this felt because I remember, running distance as a kid. And I remember, the runs I had in the Marine Corps that felt good when I wasn't completely hungover, drunk still, so, and then, so I did that, half marathon. At the same time, like I had a Vietnam vet who was starting, an open water swim challenge. And this was like swimming from Alcatraz to San Francisco. And it was a little over a mile, about a mile and a third. And so he said, okay, well, I want to get a bunch of vets to do this swim, so boats will drop us off at Alcatraz and we'll swim all the way back to the city. We'll have this training program where we're training up to learn how to swim in the cold water and how to swim with a wetsuit and all that. And he pitched it to me and I was like, no, that sounds like shit. I don't want to do that. That sounds horrible. It's cold. I don't like swimming. And, I was like, there's fucking sharks in the water. Like this all around horrible idea. But the greatest thing about him is like being a Vietnam vet, he knew how to like call that like no balls challenge. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, oh, that's cool. Well, I mean, I did it with Boy Scouts. They had fun, but look, it might not be for you. I get it. And I was like, this motherfucker's just calling me out right here. And so I was like, so then I signed up, of course, to do it. And I thought I'd hate it. But the thing about the cold water, and so sometimes I'd swim with wetsuits. Sometimes I just get in, skins with bathing suit. Like I felt so good. Like it was the best body high, and I could just get into a rhythm, swimming too. And I could get into a rhythm where like, I just heard the water and heard my breath. And like, especially underwater, like the thoughts would just go away and I could just be still. And it was one of my first experiences before I got into meditation with just stillness of the mind and stillness and being like right there. And especially afterwards, the body high was awesome. And I was like, there's something to this. I really like it. And so that was the beginning of all that.
Interesting. Interesting. And so, what you mentioned there about the cold water, I've heard that quite a bit from a few different people. I have a lot of friends who do the Wim Hof method and they go out and they do ice baths and things like that. And I take a cold shower every morning when I wake up, just to kind of reduce the inflammation and put myself in a good mindset. They say that's also a really good treatment for depression, like put you
yes. Yeah. Oh, and that was the first thing. Like even if I was depressed, I'd jump in. Just the literal shock to your system. Like there's no fucking time to be depressed. You can't.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, I'm in the cold water, and that's all you can think about. And so it just like it shocks you out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So with your training and everything like that, when would you say you became like hardcore into training for these types of events?
Well, it started. So I was in Hawaii for vacation, and it just happened to be the same week that the Ironman World Championships were happening. And so that's where like my big journey with fear really took a big turn. So I'd faced my fears with sobriety and telling my wife about my infidelity and feeling specific feelings, doing trauma work. And I learned to kind of lean into fear and not to run away from it. And then, so I saw the Ironman World Championships happening, and it fucking terrified me. I don't know why, but I was just watching these people do this. It was like, this isn't normal. Why would you do this? And like, I remember that I was getting mad, and I was like, why am I getting mad? And so I knew enough about my feelings at that point to know that the anger was just covering up fear right there. And I was like, well, why am I afraid? And like, just like, not in my mind, it didn't make sense in my mind, but in my heart, like on this kind of like intuitive level, I just knew like, this is like part of my path. And so when we got back from that vacation, I signed up for my first half Ironman. It's a 70.3 miles, 1.2 miles swim, 56-mile bike, and then half marathon, 13.1 mile run. And I started training. I signed up for that in November of 2014 and started training for that race all the way. I followed the very regimented training plan to the race was in July of 2015. And that's when I got that back, that kind of like regimentation that I really needed, that helped me balance the other things in my life. So where I needed to be as spontaneous as I could because I had like a solid base. And that I was like, oh, I feel good. I get up at the same time. I feel good. Like I'm eating right. I actually want to eat food that's good for me. Mm-hmm. The food, like the junk food and all that bullshit. Like I was just eating that to feel better for that small, like little window of that sugar rush and the dopamine hit. But I was like, oh, I'm feeling good now. I don't need that. I actually want to eat healthy.
That's awesome. And so you've been doing these events and you're kind of you're inspiring people, but you've started this podcast, Transitions from More. And how long have you been doing that? And why did you start the podcast?
Well, I started the podcast after I started the blog because writing, I think, was just an easier way for me to explore my own, unconscious mind and try to process my experiences of going into combat, coming back, trying to find meaning in life. And I mean, a big hang up for me was I got back from Iraq and I was like, what's the point? I mean, like, how do you go from like intense urban combat and to like, I'm working at a law firm as a clerk, and the secretaries get like upset if I stapled something the wrong way, like vertically instead of like diagonally. And I was like, I don't relate to anyone. Like, I don't. And I realized, okay, I need to find something. So when I started the blog, it was because, I guess backing up a little bit for this first half Ironman, I was like, I don't know why I'm training. I feel good, but I need some kind of purpose. And then I watched a YouTube clip about this woman, Lisa Hallett, who started a movement called Wear Blue, Run to Remember. And she lost her husband in Afghanistan, John Hallett. And then she just started running. She's like, I'm stuck in my grief. And just for whatever reason, she knew on a body level, I need to just go run, just do something, move forward. And so she ran to honor him. And like, I was watching that and I cried so hard watching that because there was the purpose right there. It's like, oh, she can grieve and she can mourn her husband and honor him by taking care of herself and by doing something like that. And I was like, I can do that. And so I put all the names, I put 29 names of the guys who died in that deployment in 2004 in my unit, as well as some, guys who committed suicide and died subsequent deployments later on my jersey. And I was like, I'm going to race to honor them. I'm going to race to let their families know they haven't been forgotten. And once I did that, then I was like, perfect. This is purpose. I have mind. I'm getting my mind right. I'm getting my body right. And now I'm getting my spirit right. And for me, that like completed this circle. And so I started writing about that just to see, like, I didn't know, I figured other people were doing it and, that it was no big deal. And so I started writing about it, that I was doing this and it made me feel good. And that, I was hoping to inspire other people to try it out too, so they could kind of make that transition. And then, Ironman picked up on this when I registered for my first full Ironman, and that's a couple of years ago. And they had this section that says like, the paraphrasing, this shit is like pretty crazy. Why do you do this? Like, what's your deal? And then I just wrote that. I was like, I'll take a chance. Usually I just blow through those things and, don't really fill out surveys. But I was like, I'll take a chance. And I wrote, my reason. I do this because here's where I came from. And here's how I want to honor my friends who were killed by becoming, the best version of myself possible. And I run with their names on my jersey and I bring them with me. And they picked it up, and Ironman surprised me on another podcast, Zero Blog 30. And they told me, hey, they interviewed me about my story, and they said, wow, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, I bet you wish you could tell this story kind of, you had a bigger platform, where like you can do this on a bigger stage. And I was like, well, I mean, Ironman is, pretty big stage. And I don't know, like the only thing bigger than this in the sport would be, the world championships in Kona. But like where I am and where the elite athletes that go there's like a 2 or 3 hour difference in times. And I'm like, yeah, well, I bet it'd be hard to get there. But I'm here to tell you, actually it's kind of weird because Ironman's inviting you to go to Kona. And I was like, holy shit.
Wow.
Like biggest shock of my life. I was like, I'm new to this sport. And like, I didn't think really anyone gave a shit about like why I was doing this outside of the families, the Gold Star families.
Wow.
But they wanted to hear it. And so I was like, oh, I have the chance to represent, our generation of vets coming back. And this is more about that than just Mike Ergo. This is, I have a chance to represent that. So I was like, I'll honor that. And so I went there to Kona as my second full Ironman. Fucking bizarre to be on the world stage there. And I raced there, and after that, I decided, well, I love writing, but I love, the audio format of things. And it's like we're doing now, having a conversation. That's more my style.
That's I want to get back to that Kona, the experience at Kona when they told you were going to be able to go there and you were going to be able to run there and do that triathlon. Like what went through your head, and were you like immediately like jumping into training? Did you change your training up or anything like that?
Yeah, they told me the beginning of July, and so the race is in October, and I was like 3.5 weeks out, I think, for my first full Ironman. So I hadn't even completed an Ironman yet. And I was like, well, better not fucking fail, that jumped in my head. I was also on my way to a big open water, relay swim up in Portland. We were swimming, it's a 14-mile relay in the river. And so I was just thinking, okay, well, one, holy shit, this is awesome. I get to go to Hawaii and race and like the Super Bowl of triathlon. And two, holy shit, do I have what it takes to cross the finish line? I can't fuck this up. And so there's the fear was right there. But also more than that, there was the fear and excitement were there, intertwined, and then the purpose was there. I was like, this is the purpose. Like I knew, because I had found my why. I was like, nothing's going to stop me, no matter what, no matter how hard it gets, nothing's going to stop me. And so if I didn't have my why, my purpose, I would have, spun out into some kind of, panic attack probably. But I had the purpose, and I was like, there's nothing that can stop me. And so after I finished my first full Ironman, I did pretty well by my standards. It was just under 12 hours I finished, and I was shooting for 13 hours, so bonus. So I felt good. I was like, okay, I know I have what it takes to finish the race in Kona, like time wise. I'm not going to get cut off there. My training changed. So I took a few weeks to recover, really light stuff, just walking, easy spins, some time in the pool. And then I started doing training with just wearing extra layers. And then after training sessions, spending 20 minutes in the steam room. And so really getting used to the heat and getting my body used to those kind of like humid conditions. And so that was probably the biggest change I did.
What kind of distances are we talking about with a full Ironman? It's
full Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim. And in Kona, it's in the ocean with no wetsuit, because the other swims, you get the wetsuit and you get the benefit of the buoyancy there. But so 2.4 mile swim with no wetsuit, and then 112 mile bike ride, and then a full marathon. So 26.2 miles. And so for the bike ride though, I mean, they time it perfectly. It's in October when the trade winds come out. And so you're getting this really shitty crosswind on the Queen K highway there in Hawaii. And it feels like there's always a headwind. And so I remember like pedaling downhill and just kind of getting this weird, almost like a vertigo experience. Cause it's like, I think I'm pedaling downhill, but I'm like, I feel like I'm getting blown back up the hill at one point. And so, yeah, it's a long day. You start just after sunup, and in the tropics, sun goes down a lot earlier. So I'm finishing in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the thing about an Ironman too is like when you're around the crowds, like the transition zones and stuff, it is awesome. And the first part of the bike, everybody's lining the streets to watch. The closest thing I could think of there was like Tour de France, where people are just watching and all like piled on, cheering, cowbells, everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have lots and lots of time just hearing just the wind and yourself breathing. And it's like all the time for the doubts and like all the fears and the stuff, you're hiding from yourself that really come out.
Well, that's one of the things I was just thinking about. I mean, it's almost exactly like the experience that we were talking about with cannabis.
Yes, exactly.
You're doing that thing, and it brings that fear, that doubt, that voice inside your head to the front of your face, and it's pressing it there. But in this case, it's trying to make you give up, and you've got to find your own voice in there that says, okay, I'm not going to die right now. I'm going to be okay. And I can keep going.
Exactly. It takes a little longer than an edible to get there, but it's something that I kind of crave on a soul level. And so before Kona, I read about, the greatest triathlete of all time, Mark Allen, kind of the shift he made in his career. One, he hooked up with Phil Moffatone and got into, the Moffatone method of training. And then not totally a keto diet, but higher fat, less, no junk carbohydrates, no fucking cookies and stuff. But another part of his practice was working with a shaman and really a deeply spiritual practice to find purpose. And so one of the things he did when he was in the islands, he went to the ancient, one of the it's like the ruins of a Hawaiian temple, and he gave an offering of something that was important to him. He left that there and just asked the island spirits for a safe passage during the day. And so I said, okay, I want to make sure I'm being respectful of the place I'm racing, placing a lot of intention in what I'm doing, and just having my mindset right, of mindset and heart of gratitude, and not fear-based or not like ego-based. And so I went there and I brought, there's a small rock of this place that is for whatever reason, it became this just really invigorating kind of spiritual place for me in the Yuba River up in Northern California in the Sierras. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of a restorative place for me. And so I left that there, and I was just kind of, sitting there meditating, and just asking our island spirits just for permission to be on their lands. And then I just got this weird message that came to me and said, your heart will be tested. And I said, okay, like it was weird. It was, I didn't hear it audibly, but it's this message I just felt, something I can only explain to someone who's like, done psychedelic drugs or had like deep spiritual experiences. And so during the race, it was definitely tested, not just in an aerobic, cardiovascular way, but during the run, the sun starts to go down, you run out in basically the middle of nowhere, and it's still fucking hot. Like my body was hurting. My body was hurting a lot, and my legs were hurting. And when it got dark, my mind went dark too, because there was a lot of like remaining shit from that my mind hadn't processed and hadn't I kind of just kept out of my mind, my psyche or whatever had blocked it out. And so I was replaying the way I saw people die. I was replaying the way that, I felt stuck and trapped in certain situations, and just this horrible shit. It just kept playing in my mind. And I said, instead of like resisting that, like, no, I don't want to feel that. I just let that be there. Whatever remaining pockets of just like shit that was there that I didn't want to face, I faced it like during a marathon at night. And I said, okay, just let it be there. Stop resisting. You know, it's almost like that scene in Fight Club where he pours the acid on his hand. He's like, just stop resisting. Just stop resisting.
Yeah.
Let it. And I let it be there. And then I let it be there and just let it be there. And it was there. I was like, okay, I don't have to run from this discomfort. I'm liberated. I'm free.
Yeah.
I can be here as long as I accept the discomfort. And
the parallels to psychedelic experience, I mean, that's huge. I mean, like if you're gonna do any of those substances and you're gonna get anything out of them, you kind of have to submit. You have to let go
completely. Yeah,
it's crazy. I want to ask you this. So you've been doing these, and you know, you mentioned a couple of times meditation. When did you start learning how to meditate, and how does it work into your daily routine? Do you do it once a day, twice a day?
Yeah, I meditate once a day in the morning. And then if I have time during the day or I have some time just to breathe, I'll do it then. But I make sure I have it almost first thing. So routine is usually been thrown off a little bit since I moved. But it's cold shower for 3 minutes solid, you know, and then just then meditating, and then whatever exercise I'm doing. Sometimes there's some journaling in there. But the way I got started is I was working at my other job. So I'm a full-time licensed clinical social worker at part of the VA vet centers. And at my old place I was working at, Concord, California, I got a emailed like a connection from a guy who is at one point he was a Buddhist monk, and he's also a psychologist. And he'd work at some of the hospitals doing mindfulness-based stress reduction for people just in a hospital setting. And so he said, you know, it's been on my heart to just offer this to veterans. What do you think? I was like, yeah. And so we put together a workshop, and, you know, I started meditating more and more often, and just kind of like, for me, it's there's tons of ways to do it, but it was simply just like allowing whatever's there to show up, you know, insight meditation or vipassana. And it's just breathing, staying with my breath, and just watching or acknowledging whatever thoughts or feelings come by. And just usually the idea is like kind of like leaves floating by in a stream or clouds passing overhead. You don't have to speed them up. You don't have to try to stop them. You just let them be and then come back to your breath, and things will arise, and just being okay with that. And so doing that, he eventually brought me to a 5-day silent retreat. And God, I loved it. I didn't know how it was going to go, but, you know, we spent 5 days going between walking meditation for an hour, sitting meditation for an hour, and no talking. At one point during the day, they do this, you know, the Dharma talk, or the basically a teaching of like finding out about meditation, about the kind of the Buddhist traditions, and learn about how to incorporate more of that into our life, what we felt was right. And that helped me just completely be still and just be okay with being still. And I could not have done this early on for an extended period of time. I mean, like maybe 2 minutes just observing my thoughts would have been enough, and more would just been counterproductive. But now I can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and spend an hour, sometimes 2, sometimes even 3 hours meditating, and just trying to be still and let whatever needed to show up, whether it's inspiration or fears or whatever else, just kind of bubble up to the surface.
Wow. That's that idea of letting things bubble up to the surface rather than forcing them to come out. That's huge, I think, as far as things go, because
it takes a lot of trust.
Yeah, does. It does. It takes trust in yourself, and it takes trust in the universe, really. I mean, like
it does. Yeah. I mean, if it kind of goes back to a core belief of, I mean, if like everything's just chaos, then why would you trust something like that? Yeah. I've had enough situations in my life to where I feel purpose, and I feel an order, and I don't know what it is. I don't have any kind of official religion, but I just I put myself in situations where I can act in accordance with my values and hopefully I get called out when I'm not. And then just trust that wherever I need to be, I will be. I'll feel it, and I'll feel it. And that's happened enough times to where I can trust that now.
Wow. So we gotta wrap this up in a second, but you're currently doing your Gold Star initiative right now, and can you tell us what that is exactly?
So this year at Ironman Santa Rosa this past May, it was they chose me to be an ambassador for the race because this is Ironman's 40th anniversary, and they wanted to have people who were part of the history along the way of Ironman to be ambassadors for these races. And they said, okay, what kind of special thing do you want to do for that? I was like, well, I could lead a guided meditation. I don't know, like what kind of special thing I can offer. And then I said, you know what? I want to honor, a local Gold Star family. I want to who's lost, son or daughter. And so I found a woman, Linda Kynock, who lost her son and Joshua in Iraq. And I asked her, and this was like, I kind of felt it. And I was like, I want to carry a flag for him during this race. And I'd run with a flag a little bit, but not for a marathon. I was like, I want to carry a flag. Like I just, that fear again showed up. I was like, let's do it. So I said, would you allow me to honor your son by carrying a flag and like in memory and honor of him along the marathon for this race and present it to you at the finish line and bring you in? Because with Gold Star families, what I've heard from them and some of the people who work with them is that, there's a big separation between them and the public and even vets, because, they have a son or daughter who's killed. And then after, people will rally around them for the funeral, and people will rally around them like right then in the moment of crisis. But afterwards, people's own discomfort lets them or kind of keeps them away. And so not only do they lose their son or daughter, but they lose the community. And then on top of that, all the vets maybe who served with that person, like myself, if they're dealing with survivor guilt, also don't approach the family. So then they're just like completely cut off. And I was like, this is bullshit, just like, we got vets coming back who are taking their lives because they don't have purpose or it's hard to deal. This is bullshit and this needs to stop. And I was like, we need each other for our healing. So I was like, this is a way we can bring, the community, veterans and Gold Star families together. And so I carried a flag and for her and her and this veteran's his daughter. So the vet's mom and the vet's daughter were both there, and I presented to them, and it felt really, really good. Like it felt good. And I'm like, I don't know if I can run another race without carrying a flag for a Gold Star family. And so I did it again for a half Ironman this summer. And I asked the people I know at Ironman, it's like, so this is cool that I'm doing it. I love it, but let's make this a thing. Can we do this on a bigger stage throughout the country? And they said, yeah, let's do it. Let's call it the Gold Star Initiative. And so that's what we're doing. And we're going to officially announce it at this November. But next year, there'll be at least 6 races around the country where a veteran will be able to carry a flag for a local Gold Star family. And it's just going to be fun, bringing, endurance and sport and things we love to do and connecting it with a bigger purpose. And so like, we're going to make this happen, and vets are going to be carrying flags next year, and we'll see where it goes. But the cool thing is that I've already got a lot of people contact me like, hey, what's the next step? How do we do this? We're working on the details, but the short story is, it's going to be awesome, and people's lives are going to be changed, and people are going to be re-engaged with the community. So it is exciting.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing. I really enjoyed this conversation, and there's so much here for anybody who's listening, particularly veterans who are trying to get their lives back together. And, really anybody who's trying to get out of a bad situation, not just if you're a veteran, but anybody who's trying to get out of a bad situation, who's trying to make change in their lives. You listen to your podcast a good bit, Transitions for More, and I think it's a fantastic show.
Thank you.
And I really love what you're doing. For people to get in touch with you, transitionsformore.com, is that the best place? Or
yeah, that's probably the best place. And then Instagram, I'm probably the most active of all the social media things. One thing I have for everybody too, it's a free ebook. And I try to break it down really style so 0311s and grunts like me could understand it. And it's just called Mind, Body, and Spirit, Reconnecting to Purpose. And it's just ways to reconnect to your mind in a healthy way, reconnect to your body through, sleep, nutrition, and working out, and then spirit, which means purpose or community. And so it's free to download. And eventually I'll turn it into a bigger book. But if anyone's looking for anything to get started right now, it's probably the best way to do it. So transitionsformore.com, and then it says, I think, download the ebook. It's a tab there. They can check it out.
We'll put a link up on the show notes for people to easily access that from the show too.
Awesome.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Any last words?
I'd say that we covered most of it. And I think that the biggest thing that I'm learning right now is that just trusting and developing a sense of intuition and trusting my heart. And if, sometimes it doesn't make sense with my mind, but I have to trust now that's a deeper knowledge going on. And so if anyone's looking for that, spending some time in silence, spending some time reflecting and writing down their values and what's important to them, that is the key right there. But I think other than that, my relationship with fear, and I think everyone's relationship for fear, instead of running away from it, can almost use that as kind of like the direction to move towards, because it's something that's always revealed something about me that I can do better at, or my next step. But, facing that fear, it's always intertwined with the excitement. There's a part of us that always wants to go through that because there's something exciting in the other end. If you can see that part of it, it makes it a little easier to deal with.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much, man. And everybody out there, take what you learned in this episode, start to apply it, get over there to transitionsformore.com, check out that ebook, and get out there and start and live your best lives while you can.
Rah.
Hey guys, I just want to take a moment to thank you for listening to this episode of the Warrior Soul podcast. And again, I want to encourage you to share these episodes out with friends, with people who could use this information. Our goal is to awaken the veteran community, and we think that it's the sleeping giant in this country. There's a lot of veterans out there who are imbued with a lot of natural leadership, a lot of talent, a lot of skills that could be useful for this society. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring this country to its greatness by empowering them. And so if you can, share this episode out, and please write us a written review up on iTunes. Additionally, if you want to connect more with us, you can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. On Instagram, we are at Warrior Soul Agoge. On Twitter, we are at Warrior Soul Gear. On Facebook, we are the Warrior Soul Agoge on our page. And if you want to join our private fitness group, you can join the Warrior Soul Fitness Academy. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back at you very soon with another episode.